But there's no doubt at all we need to hear from the Met Police and we need to hear from the government about why they think our fundamental right to peaceful protest no longer exists. 7 minutes past 7 is the time. Let's talk to Sir Iain Duncan Smith. He's former leader of the Conservative Party and he joins me right now. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. Lots to talk about. I want to talk about local elections, fallout and all of that. But your thoughts, first of all, on those arrests and the Met Police releasing those 6 people after 16 hours being held in police cells, saying no charges will be brought, no evidence against them, and saying they regret those arrests. Do you think that was justified given the proceedings, given threats from other organisations, or do you think they were actually, well, basically overreaching their powers?
Well, interestingly, these arrests were not made under the new powers given to them. So first and foremost, those who were complaining about the new stuff that would be wrong. This was made simply by the police on the basis that they thought, as I understand it, that these individuals were going to be doing something to disrupt the procedures. I don't know where they got that information from or what supposed intelligence they had. Certainly it looks like if they'd searched the vans and searched the individuals, they wouldn't have found any equipment at that stage. So it did seem to me that if they hadn't found any equipment at that point, they should have let them get on with their business. I just don't quite understand why they took them into custody if it was clear and obvious at the time when they were searching them that there weren't these bits of equipment that they thought they were.
Do you think this had been agreed in advance? We know they'd said, the Met Police had said there would be a low tolerance for disruption. And look, I think the police had majority support for that. People saying, look, we don't, I feel the same way. I don't want eco-protesters gluing themselves to the coach or sitting in the street, or, certainly not setting off rape alarms, which is one of the threats, and, frightening the horses. We could have had, a horse running amok in the crowds. I think we can all agree that we should be able to have state occasions without them being disrupted. But that's the thing. There was no evidence whatsoever this organisation that had been in talks with the police about where their protest would be in Trafalgar Square, visible, seen, heard, but not disrupting proceedings. That is what we allow in a democracy, isn't it? There's no evidence that they were going to do anything else. Graham Smith, who we're going to talk to later, we understand, told the police who arrested, look, here are the people I've been talking to in the Met Police. This is what we've agreed. We're here legally. And they were still taken into custody for all those hours.
Yeah, I think there's no question the police will have to explain why the police on the ground took them into custody. I'm loath to have a go at them until I absolutely know what was behind all the facts. I know this much, that they were generally, and I've talked to the police at the time, very, very concerned because of the nature of who was there, heads of state, heads of the British government, politicians, the royal family, of course, all those sort of things, and a lot of crowd, that they were very, very worried about anything that they might have missed. So it's possible that that led to them taking absolutely no chances. But I must say that we'll need to know exactly what was in the minds of the police officers that arrested them and took them into custody, why they took them into custody.
Yeah, of course, the issue, of course, the simple phone call to senior people would have discovered, that these people are we know we're fine with these guys, let them get on their way. Again, I'm not entirely sure that our policing of our fundamental human rights and democratic rights in this country should be based on, what a couple of police officers think. That's my worry. Let's talk, though, more about what happened before the coronation. I certainly think that the Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak and the government pretty much have been saved in terms of a lot of very bad headlines when it came to the coronation after that local election. Absolutely, pasting, I think we can safely say. The worst case scenario that was being put out as a way of making it look good on the day ended up being not even the worst case scenario. More than 1,000 seats were lost. 49 councils the Conservatives previously controlled, now out of their control. It was an unremitting disaster, wasn't it?
It was a terrible night It's a terrible day for the Conservatives. Our heart goes out to the councillors who worked hard and didn't end up losing their seats. I think almost certainly I went out. We didn't have elections in London, so I went out and helped others in other areas. And I wrote a piece about this in the Telegraph yesterday. And the point that came across to me was fundamentally every time I knocked on Conservative doorsteps that are traditionally voted Conservative, they were either abstaining, they were going to protest on their ballot papers, or they were going to vote for somebody else. And they all said for the same reason, that, high taxes, the cost of living, and their feeling that the government had kind of lost its way in understanding that people are toughing it out. And when you mention, that the government, did give support for the cost of living, then their immediate answer was, well, the cost of living shouldn't have been there. And then at the end of the day, we want our taxes down. And there's a lot of them being dragged into operate tax. So there was a annoyance and anger. And I was here in '96. I was campaigning in '96. I was an MP, and people have compared it to '96. I don't believe that's the case. I think there's still
'96 being the local elections, of course, before we saw that huge victory for Tony Blair in '97.
Because the thing I did discover on Dawson's was interesting, and I know these things are all personal, but every time I said to them, what does this mean for you in the next year and a half, 2 years on the elections? And they said, well, I'm very angry with the Conservatives, angry with the government. I want my taxes down. I want growth. I want you to get on and deliver some of the regulatory changes that you had to make to give us migration control. All that stuff has to be done. You haven't done it, is what they said. But if you get that done, I'm certainly not locked in. I will think about it. So there's a chance that I'll come back. But you have to deliver in the next, period. And that had on the majority of doorsteps. And after they said they were very angry. So my sense about this is there is a certain amount of balance. In '96, they were saying to us, no, we're done, we're finished, we're voting for Blair, that's the end of it, and I'm fed up with you.
And that's a different thing, isn't it? Keir Starmer certainly doesn't seem to have the Blair appeal, but we were saying simply last week, he's no Tony Blair, and the support for Labour is very soft. There's a lot of concern, though, that, if there isn't delivery, and I think as a nation we would like delivery on all of the Rishi Sunak's pledges, but because they're in the interests of everyone in this nation. And again, even if Keir Starmer was elected, I would want to have success because, again, it's the people at the bottom of the pile who lose out the most when any government fails. But we are looking at the prospect of a hung parliament on current polling. Again, lots can change. Goodness me, we know how much things can change quickly in this country now. And then the prospect of, everyone's denying it, but who are we kidding? A coalition or some sort of, confidence supply deal with the Liberal Democrats, or maybe even the SNP. The prospect of, say, a deal on PR, proportional representation, different voting system in this country, possibly the undermining of Brexit as well. The implications of this are huge, aren't they?
Yeah, of course they are, absolutely. I mean, the whole point about wanting to take government or wanting to hold on to government are about your beliefs. And you believe that the other side will do what is necessary to change it so that you don't have another shot at it. So the whole thing at the next year and a half is the government has got to demonstrate that it is able to give people back their money through lower taxes. It's got to demonstrate that it has control of migration. It's got to demonstrate that it's got growth going in the economy and that their businesses and their jobs are no longer at risk or threatened, and that people's earnings grow in businesses as a result of that. One of the things that was thrown at me was VAT. Why, as a business leader, a number of them said, do I have to worry about VAT at 80,000 turnover? It's ridiculous. It's bureaucratic. It's nonsense. Why don't you lift that? Let us grow. Things like that, which are annoying them because they assume the Conservative government understands that. And so that's the challenge for the Conservatives. On the Labour side, the challenge for the Labour Party was that at this time in '96, they were 15 points ahead, roaring towards a very clear Labour victory. I didn't see that. And to be honest with you, I didn't see a lot of desire. I didn't hear anybody mention Keir Starmer's name at the time on the doorstep. So whilst they've succeeded and done well, the question for them is, does this transfer into a general election result? And I didn't get the feel for that.
No, that certainly seemed to be the general feel, didn't it? Just finally, I do want to ask you also about, there's a trade mission today to Hong Kong, sort of renewing and sort of strengthening Britain's business ties with Hong Kong, of course now completely under Chinese control. We had big rows last week about the Chinese vice president, the man who oversaw that crackdown on pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, being invited to the Coronation. And I know, you're honestly one of the Conservative MPs, many MPs, who have been basically facing issues with the Chinese government. I'm trying to think what the word is. What you're facing, injunctions. They won't like, they wouldn't like you. Sanctions. That's the word. Thank you so much. It's been a long weekend. Sanctions from the Chinese government. What do you make of this trade mission?
I'm astonished. I'm absolutely astonished that a British minister could be sent to Hong Kong. Bear in mind that the Chinese government trashed the agreement, Sino-British agreement, international treaty, which guaranteed certain rights for the people of Hong Kong. Since then, it's imposed a security law. It's arrested peaceful democracy campaigners. They've trumped up charges. One of them, very good man, that owned Apple Daily and was a journalist like you, Jimmy Lai, he is now languishing in prison. He's in his 70s. He is a British citizen, a British passport holder. The British government has absolutely failed to publicly state that he is a British citizen with a British passport. He's not a BNO passport holder. He's a British citizen. He doesn't hold, as I understand it, a Chinese passport. And so he's now under arrest. And they don't get consular rights because they won't say it. America's called him a British citizen. Even the European Union's called him a British citizen. But this government here, my government, will not call him a British citizen for fear of upsetting the Chinese. Yeah. His whole visit is appalling, really. You know, when you think that when the coronation was on, President Xi couldn't be bothered to come to the UK, even though we were sort of kissing up to him in a way that we were. And he sends, instead, the man that was responsible for the crackdown in Hong Kong. I think that was spitting in our faces, frankly. And I just don't understand why we are sending a minister to particularly Hong Kong when we know all that's going on with, you know, slave labor being used in China, when you've got genocide taking place in Xinjiang. It's a shocker, really. And I just think we alone now seem to be out of step with everybody else. We can't even call China a threat at the moment. Okay. We talk about dealing with them with robust pragmatism. Well, if any of your listeners can tell me what the hell that means, I don't know, frankly.
Really appreciate you joining us. Very strong words there, Sir Iain Duncan Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party.